We are the most oppressed team in this tournament.
There's a sentence that no football federation should ever have to say about a World Cup. And on this past Friday, Iran said it. We are the most oppressed team in this tournament. That is not a fan on social media. That is not a pundit looking for a headline. That is Amir Galanoy, the head coach of Iran's national football team, describing his side's experience at the 2026 World Cup in terms that no coach at any previous tournament has had to use. And in the days since, Iran's football federation has done something that very few national federations ever do in the middle of a World Cup. They have filed a formal complaint against the very organization running the tournament their players qualified to compete in. Stay with me on this one, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why FIFA is now caught in the middle of one of the most uncomfortable controversies of this entire World Cup. Welcome back to News About FIFA. Today, we are going through exactly what happened, why it happened, what FIFA's role in all of this actually is, and what this tells us about a tournament that continues to generate as many headlines off the pitch as on it. Let's start with what actually triggered this, because the situation Iran is describing is genuinely unprecedented in World Cup history. According to Iranian sports officials, United States authorities have mandated a restrictive entry window for the Iranian national team. The squad is required to enter the country no earlier than 24 hours before kickoff, and they must depart the same day the match concludes. 24 hours. That is the entire window Iran's players have to be on American soil, before they compete on the biggest stage in their sport. Compare that to what every other team at this tournament is doing. Standard preparation for an international match, let alone a World Cup fixture, typically involves arriving 2 or 3 days in advance. Time to recover from travel. Time to train on local pitches. Time to adjust to time zones, to climate, to the specific conditions of the host city. That preparation window isn't a luxury teams request out of preference. It's considered a basic competitive standard at the highest level of the sport, something nearly every national federation builds its entire travel plan around. Iran does not have access to that standard. Because of the visa and travel restrictions in place between Iran and the United States, the Iranian Federation made the decision to base their entire World Cup camp, not in America at all, but in Mexico. Think about the logistics of that for a moment. A team competing in matches in the United States, Los Angeles and Seattle specifically, where their group stage fixtures are scheduled, is living and training across an international border for the entire tournament. Every match requires the entire squad, coaching staff, medical team, and support personnel to cross from Mexico into the United States, play the match, and in many cases, head straight back across that same border almost immediately afterward. There is no equivalent situation anywhere else in this tournament. Every other qualified nation is able to set up a base in reasonable proximity to its host cities, follow a consistent training rhythm, and prepare the way international football has always assumed teams would be able to prepare. Iran is operating under a completely different set of rules, not because of anything related to football, but because of the broader diplomatic relationship between their country and the host nation. Here's where it gets even more serious. This is where things get interesting, because the restriction is not simply an inconvenience that the team has had to work around quietly. According to the Federation's own statement, it directly affected the team's performance in their opening match. Iran drew 2-2 with New Zealand to begin their World Cup campaign, and Galanoy was direct about what he believed contributed to that result. He said the disruption had prejudiced Iran in the match, explaining that under the coaching staff's original plan, the national team needed to travel to the host city 2 days before each fixture, in order to achieve what he called optimal technical and physical condition, and then return to their base the day after the match concluded. That plan was not possible under the current restrictions. And a coach who has spent his entire career building preparation routines around exactly that kind of timeline, watched his team be denied the ability to follow it, on the largest stage his profession offers. The Football Federation of Iran responded by announcing it will lodge a formal complaint with FIFA. Their statement was carefully worded, but unmistakably pointed. They said these restrictions are inconsistent with the principles of providing equal conditions for participating teams, and that the situation may affect their technical preparation going forward in the tournament. That phrase, equal conditions for participating teams, sits at the very center of what a World Cup is supposed to guarantee every nation that qualifies for it. Every team that earns its place is supposed to compete under comparable circumstances. Not identical circumstances, because no two nations share identical resources, travel distances, or domestic football infrastructure, but comparable enough that the actual competition on the pitch remains fair, and that a result is determined by football, rather than by logistics imposed from outside the sport entirely. Iran's argument is that a 24-hour entry window, forced cross-border logistics, and the inability to follow a standard preparation schedule, represents something well beyond the normal variation that different nations experience at a World Cup. This is not a team complaining about a long flight or an unfamiliar climate. This is a team arguing that the basic structural conditions of their participation have been altered in a way that affects the result of actual matches. Now, here's where this story connects to something we, at News About FIFA, have been tracking for days. Because Iran's situation has not existed in isolation. It is part of a broader pattern of access and entry complications that have shaped this tournament's opening week, in ways nobody fully anticipated when the hosting rights were awarded. There has already been a case of a FIFA-appointed match official denied entry into the United States entirely, despite holding official tournament credentials issued directly by FIFA itself. There have been reports of supporters from multiple qualified nations being denied travel visas, despite holding valid, purchased match tickets. Iran's federation has separately reported that its official ticket allocation was withdrawn in the days before their opening match, meaning Iranian supporters who held legitimate federation-distributed tickets found themselves unable to use them at all. Put all of that together, and Iran's formal complaint is not an isolated grievance from one frustrated federation. It is the most visible and most institutionally significant expression yet of a pattern that has been building since before the tournament even kicked off. A pattern that keeps returning to the same underlying question. Who actually gets full access to this World Cup, and on what terms? So, how does FIFA fit into all of this? Because Iran's complaint is not directed at the United States government. It is directed at FIFA. The organization that owns this tournament, sets its competitive rules, awards hosting rights, and is supposed to guarantee the fairness of the competition it runs across every host nation. As of Friday, neither FIFA nor the U.S. Department of Homeland Security had publicly responded to the Federation's complaint. That silence matters, because it places FIFA in a position the organization has now found itself in more than once during this tournament's opening days. Caught directly between the sovereign immigration authority of a host nation and the competitive obligations it owes to every single team that worked through years of qualification to earn its place at this World Cup. This is genuinely new territory for the tournament, and it's worth being honest about why. Previous World Cups have certainly featured travel complications, political tension, and logistical headaches for visiting nations. That is nothing new in the history of this competition. But a multi-country hosting format, where a qualified team can be required to base its entire camp in one host nation, while competing in matches across the border in another, creates exactly the kind of scenario Iran is now experiencing. A scenario that simply did not exist when a World Cup was staged entirely within the borders of a single host country, the way every previous tournament has been. Think about it from a purely competitive standpoint. Setting aside the diplomatic and political dimensions entirely for a moment, every football person understands how much preparation time genuinely matters at this level. The difference between arriving with several days to settle, having trained on the actual match pitch, having properly adjusted to the climate and the time zone, versus arriving the day before, playing immediately, and leaving the same evening. That difference can be the gap between a team performing at its peak and a team performing in survival mode just to get through 90 minutes. Iran's coaching staff clearly believed that gap was real and that it cost them points. And they said so publicly and on record, attributing results lost in their opening match directly to circumstances entirely outside the team's control. Now, it's worth being careful here about what we actually know and what remains uncertain. because that distinction matters in a story like this. FIFA has not issued a public response confirming or denying the specifics of Iran's complaint. The exact nature of the underlying restrictions, whether they stem from a particular security designation, a broader existing visa policy, or some other administrative classification, has not been fully detailed publicly by either side involved. What is confirmed on the record is the Federation's own official statement, the head coach's public comments to media, and the simple fact that Iran's entire World Cup camp is indeed based in Mexico, rather than in the United States, where their matches are actually being played. What happens next from here is genuinely uncertain. Iran has 2 more group stage matches remaining in this tournament. And the Federation's stated hope is that FIFA will review the full situation and address their concerns before the competition progresses any further into the knockout stages. There are a few realistic paths from here worth considering. FIFA could choose to intervene directly with US authorities to request some kind of adjusted arrangement for the remainder of Iran's group stage fixtures, though that would require a level of diplomatic coordination that sits well outside football's usual jurisdiction, and that FIFA has rarely had to attempt at this scale. Alternatively, FIFA could acknowledge that a competitive disadvantage genuinely exists, while determining that it simply has no authority to alter a sovereign nation's immigration procedures, leaving Iran to play out the rest of the tournament under the exact same conditions they have already experienced. Or, perhaps most likely, given how the tournament has unfolded so far, the situation could continue without any formal resolution at all, becoming one of several access and fairness controversies that quietly come to define this tournament's broader legacy once it's over. None of those outcomes are certain at this stage. And it's worth remembering that FIFA's president has previously responded to other access controversies at this same tournament, by suggesting people should simply, in his own words, chill and relax. A response that did very little to calm the situation when it was applied to the earlier case of the match official who was denied entry entirely. Whether that same tone gets applied to a formal federation complaint, backed by an entire National Football Association, remains very much to be seen. Here's the part that really makes you think. What is clear, regardless of how FIFA ultimately responds, is that this story is no longer simply about logistics or travel arrangements. It has become a much larger question about what a World Cup actually guarantees the nations that earn their way into it. Every team that goes through qualification, the years of work, the matches won and painfully lost along the way, the moment of genuine celebration when a place in the finals is finally secured, does so with the basic understanding that once you arrive at the tournament itself, the competition will be fair. That the conditions, while never perfectly identical between nations, will at least be reasonably comparable. Iran is now arguing, formally and on record, that this basic guarantee has not been honored in their case. And they have put that argument in writing, directly to the one organization whose job it actually is to answer it. For Iranian players, this situation adds a layer of difficulty that goes far beyond anything most footballers ever have to navigate at a World Cup. Crossing an international border before and after every single match. Living out of a camp that isn't even located in the country where they are competing. Carrying, alongside the ordinary pressure of representing your nation on the biggest stage the sport offers, the additional weight of knowing your own preparation has been compromised by circumstances entirely outside your control and outside football itself. And for Iranian supporters, those who held legitimate tickets and found their access quietly withdrawn, and those who simply wanted the chance to watch their national team compete on equal footing with every other qualified nation in the world, this is its own particular kind of disappointment. The kind that has nothing to do with the score line on the pitch, and everything to do with whether the tournament they had waited 4 years for, actually treated their team fairly from the very start. So, what do you think? Should FIFA intervene directly, when a host nation's immigration policy creates a genuine, measurable, competitive disadvantage for a team that legitimately qualified? Or is this simply outside football's jurisdiction entirely, however unfair it might feel, to the players living through it? I'd be genuinely curious to hear where you land on that question. Leave it in the comments, I read every single one. If you want to keep following how this develops, along with everything else happening around this tournament, go ahead and subscribe to News About FIFA. We'll keep covering it honestly, as it continues to unfold. This story is still developing. And as always, on News About FIFA, football never stays quiet for long.